got all my speakers back and some questions are coming in. Got one or two specific ones coming in first of all. Charlotte, there's some interest in your wavy fabric. Yeah, that's the one. Okay. Just some very practical things. How much energy are we talking about generating here? Say for a passing train. Have you got some sense of? There we are. It's a 7-carriage tube train going at 48 miles an hour.
Well, this is exactly what I'm working on right now. Are these different numbers and figures? But they are really promising, even in a tube station with no train and just with the ventilation system, it still responds to a gentle breeze, which is exactly the context I'm looking at. You know, an environment where even a turbine wouldn't start turning, you can start to scavenge off the most small amount of energy.
And your sense is that the scavenged energy isn't offset by the extra load on the train going through?
Absolutely. No, but that's the key element. Just looking at the stopping distance alone, where you're actually using energy to stop the train with the braking system. So if you apply extra drag on stopping distance, which can be up to 200 meters long, you're actually assisting the train.
Right. Okay. Interesting. Some interesting stuff coming around smart grids and all the rest of it. Do we feel our vision is that smart grids will enable 100% carbon-free power and heat?
I guess we committed to doing that, so hopefully yes. On balance, yes, definitely. Electricity power should be doable. Net, again, we might need some CCS if we get it working. But yes, and we might be able to do it without it as well. We'll do it a lot cheaper with than without. I guess that's the real benefit here.
And a chance for a conversation between the two of you. A question or a thought from Ian. Could massively parallel neuromorphic computing be used for managing the smart energy grids? Have you met Simon? Thomas?
Hi.
No, absolutely. I think that could be an interesting application. We've been looking at getting data from the grid or power consumption and finding interesting patterns in there with the help of neuromorphic computing on a large scale, ultimately, to actually manage the grid. I think that's a very interesting, very promising idea.
Well, especially if you mention, I think there's two particular use cases. You mentioned the having a low power envelope. So in that sense, that's maybe beneficial because you don't want your control logic to use more power than your device at some point. So that's good.
Absolutely.
And also you mentioned kind of this pattern recognition. That's maybe indeed one of these kind of future things. You need to kind of watch what's happening and maybe spot patterns that are unusual to see whether. I mean, I'm talking 2037 and maybe more here, right? But spot kind of be the police of early warning systems of things maybe about to go wrong.
Absolutely.
So yes.
Good prospect.
Sounds good.
Get over a Costa coffee somewhere.
Will do.
Somewhere on campus.
Of course, have a beer today.
Can you ever imagine an international smart energy grid where sort of, we've got national grid and doing our stuff. Obviously, there's European competition. What's the global vision for what's going on here?
It is already international, right? So we have most of Europe has one continental grid. That's essentially one grid with different companies operating bits and pieces of it, but they already need to coordinate. You can do that smarter. That's part of the promise of smart grid. Right. You're going to see more interconnection already between different countries, maybe crossing offshore wind farms, etc. So yeah, I think it's going to be more complex, and well. There was talk of increased integration. I think with Brexit we have to see how that works, but I still think on the energy system it just makes sense to integrate this further. So yes, I do see that going ahead, and indeed the talk of sharing especially wind resources over large distances, wind and solar, that's just useful.
Interesting. I'll ask you a specific question, but then it'll, I think, broaden into a broader one. Someone said, where is it? How do you make a semi-autonomous grid Putin-proof? And this raises a bigger issue. There is a concern that all this stuff is eminently hackable, doable, strangeable. I'm getting very uncomfortable that I'm dependent on something which those who would not wish me well seem to have a capacity at will to penetrate, and I don't like that world. So offer me some either words to encourage my anxiety or allay my fears.
I think it's good to have that as a worry, not whether it's Putin or something else, but to if you're, I think the big risk in all these things is you're over-optimizing your system to the extent that it becomes very brittle, and whether that is by accident or on purpose, you take out one element or a combination of elements, or you give it wrong information, bad things start to happen. So I think that comes back to what I was talking about, kind of having this digital circuit breakers, right? So always have in mind that there are things, whether it's nature or whether it's some adversary, that will trip up your system and somehow, meaningfully limit the scope of the impact that has. So I think if you really build that into the core of your design, of your markets, of your control. So I'm not sure. Can you stop it? I'm not sure. Do you have to think about it? Absolutely. So, and can you handle it? I think if you're clever enough, you can intercept most of this. And even in today's system, of course, bad things occasionally happen.
Right. And I'm interested maybe to broaden it, because you're some of the smartest brains around. And this whole issue of, as we're getting big data, things zooming around, people know more about me than I know about myself. And I'm just wondering, you can stick your head down and get on with your particular bit of technology or whatever. But we're in a kind of human ecosystem that is needing to wrestle with some of these, whether they're ethical issues or regulatory issues or all the rest of it. We are. It seems the fest next year is going to have taken us a quantum leap further down this road, and even more of me is going to be available to someone else, so they can do something clever in the name of making my life better. I just wonder, just interested in your take about this whole area of data and privacy and use of it, and are you feeling, that's someone else's business, we're technologists, we get on with it, or do you have a response that offers something to this audience who are probably also wrestling with that issue? Who would like to offer a first chip?
I can certainly
Charlotte.
say, the world is always changing. Every aspect, every industry is changing and developing, and we relying more on technology. But I think, we also used to exposing what we do because we get useful things back. Even if it's Facebook, we use it freely. But I think it's just people need to have a greater awareness. In the world of cybersecurity, people just don't understand it. There's like this club of people who understand these things, and then everyone else who's actually part of the system just pretends to be complacent and unaware. And that also is within, even the energy world, there's people doing great work and these big industries doing these massive things, but we all are part of the problem, so we all actually part of the solution, whether we are a small scale just doing our laundry or we a massive business. Right. So it's a general awareness and to actually be responsible no matter how small you are as part of that unit.
Who else would like to chip into this?
Thomas? I can maybe say something. So I think that fundamentally we just need to have society who accepts or rejects the technology that we develop, and ultimately we need to be able to do is train people, citizens, to just simply be critical thinkers, right? That understand the implications of their behavior in the short term and in the long term. And I read the other day, and this came up to this today as well, about spotting fake news and training AI to spot fake news. And I felt like, why don't we train and educate the people to actually critically think about these issues? And I think, so what is needed here is simply society to decide that each and every one is making, or we collaboratively make this decision about accepting or rejecting technology, and we simply need to be trained as critical thinkers. And that, of course, means an education system that works very well. And I think that's probably as much as I'm going to say about the education system.
Simon?
Yeah, I might have a slightly different opinion, because I think you have all these new tools that are being used perhaps for, less savory purposes sometimes, to generate fake news, to maybe influence an election here or there, or and you can't, that gets so sophisticated, you may not be able to, to discover what's going on unless you use similar technology kind of in defense. So in that sense, so that's maybe one part of the thing. I think it's kind of something you can't really avoid. Also, it becomes really hard, I think, to really make a decision yourself how much you want to share, because you kind of lose track of what sharing this little bit of information does if it's combined with this other little bit and that other little bit. And yeah, ultimately I think we have to somehow, or legislate. The question is, what do you legislate, right? So you need the interaction, but at least there has to be a discussion on what is the social norm for what you're allowed to do with data. And to some extent that discussion is ongoing. Yeah. That is shifting, that's true. And at the same time, I think as kind of the engineers building some of the kit, yeah, we do need to think about it. We maybe not the scope of what we can work on individually is maybe not large enough to encompass that. So I can flag it up, but I can't solve it, right? So the question is finding people who can solve other bits of the puzzle, and that may be a good idea to do more of.
Ben, do you have an offering into this vexed pot?
Yeah, in terms of especially medical data, there's a fine balance that likely has to be walked. So as more and more of the field pushes towards trying to personalize medicine and make targeted therapies for cancer or whatever the indication is, there's a level of detail that needs to be uncovered, and that may be, it might be sequencing data, it may be other things that uncover things about your genome. But who gets that data and whether you should get that data too is a whole different story. So if you want the personalized treatment, somebody needs to look at it. But then, if let's say insurance companies are getting it to reset premiums based on a prediction, there's some interesting things there. But then also there's a level of, do you actually want to get it yourself? So if somebody else knows more about you and knows that you might have a 5% increased risk of a heart attack, is it actually beneficial for you to know that? And the added stress that maybe then you're going to change your diet to something else and worry about this all the time. And so it's not just whether or not your data needs to be kept from other people, but whether it also needs to be kept from yourself.
Right. Just interesting, I was facilitating the World Circular Economy Forum in Helsinki the week before last. 1,500 people looking at resource efficiency and because basically we are consuming rather more planets than we live on. And there was a fascinating presentation by a lady from ING Banking, looking at visioning for the future, and she said, we just have to stop getting hung up about privacy. This new world, you just be open, just share everything you're doing, and it means that technology will be able to do all sorts of wonderful things to support and advise you. And we're in a world where we're sort of hung up about privacy. If you've got nothing to hide, just get on with living, and all these amazing robots and sensors and all the rest of it will create a wonderful space and opportunities and choices for you all the way along the line. And I'm just wondering whether it sounded a bit brave new world to me, because I sort of feel I need to cling on to privacy, but maybe we need a debate about some paradigm shifts in what we think we have to hang on to, because technology is the ultimate buster. I don't know, anyone want to offer a thought on that, Charlotte?
That absolutely is the truth, but most of us don't actually know.
Have we got a mic on? Is there a mic? All right, is it coming? Right.
No, but all of that is true, but the problem is that as individuals, we're not aware of where our data is. Yeah. But there is massive changes with the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulations. They're coming into force next year. And already anyone who holds sensitive information from a shopping company through to medical information, they're going to have to start looking at the policies of how they regulate that information, how they actually translate that information to their users. So yes, when people have your information, you get, great services back. They know what you want to buy, and there it is. But it's just about, they really also, from my perspective, it's a massive design challenge to really translate and explain that.
Right, okay. Anyone else want to offer a thought on that?
Yes. I guess I'm simply old-fashioned in a way. I like, occasionally making a mistake and not having that out there, and occasionally and not, having everything there for someone to dig through and kind of make their own story about me. It's nice to somehow be sometimes anonymous in a big city, even though CCTV is following you all over. But I pretend I don't notice. Yeah.
Okay, well, maybe one of the things that's emerging from our conversation and our things today is that running in parallel with the extraordinary technological developments that are taking place is the need for a maturing conversation on what it all means, what we want, what we don't want, and how we ensure we both get the best but are also protected from the worst. So that's maybe an interesting set of political, sociological discussions that need to be had along in parallel. Just as I did for the previous group of people, if there's a set of amazing businesses from BT to Shell to goodness knows what else in this room who are throbbing with anticipation for 2037, if you had one message you'd just like to leave ringing from your experience of your world, ringing in the ears of these great businesses that are embracing but still trying to make sense of the future, what would that unusual thought you might lob into their enormous brains? I'm going to start with you, Thomas, because you are my brain.
I was so hoping it started.
Yeah, no, I just...
Tough luck. No, look, we're thinking about the future. We're working on the future. We're developing really cool tech. I would love to bring this into society. Society is, in my opinion, probably a bit too liberal there, but is deciding whether to accept and reject that. And I think industry would be a great way to explore that.
Right. Okay. Simon.
Yes, perhaps two thoughts, if I may.
Yeah.
First thought would be to indeed work on your niche, work on what you do best, but indeed think about the system implications, not on just the short term and the medium and long term. And also, if you make a process, whether that's smart energy, something else, assume that it will go wrong and build a system to handle that.
Brilliant. And Charlotte, apart from appealing for a spare redundant tunnel, what else?
Well, I think that we all understand that the way that we've done things for the last however long cannot continue to be done the same way. So we all need to make changes. There's amazing changes in business models and different ways we research and develop different things. But what I really think is the most important thing is that all of those big researches and products go down to individuals. And it's actually really empowering to think that, okay, well, it's up to us as individuals to really think of what we can do in our little lives.
Okay.
Yeah.
And finally, Ben.
Yeah. I would say, there's a big opportunity to take areas that maybe aren't traditionally in healthcare and apply principles from those areas and insights and technologies. So whether it's materials design or way to think about problems. And likely the biggest impacts in healthcare aren't going to necessarily be developed by developing the next small molecule or the next drug. It's going to come from how you actually apply this in the context of a care setting and what technology you use to actually make it possible.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, could we say a huge thank you to our experts, our panel? Great. You just stay there for a moment.